CEO took his mute 7-year-old daughter to the playground and froze when a poor boy made her speak for the first time. Before we dive into the story, drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. Enjoy the story. Daniel Mitchell adjusted his Armani tie one more time before stepping out of his black Mercedes in the parking lot of Riverside Park. The afternoon sun cast long shadows across the playground where the sounds of children's laughter echoed like a symphony he'd forgotten how to hear. His 7-year-old daughter, Sophie, sat quietly in the back seat, her golden hair catching the light like spun silk, her blue eyes fixed on something only she could see. "Come on, sweetheart," Daniel said softly, opening her door. Sophie slipped her small hand into his much larger one, but said nothing. She never said anything. For 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, Daniel counted every single one. Sophie had been silent. Not by choice, the doctor said. The trauma of losing her mother in that car accident had locked away her voice somewhere deep inside, and no amount of therapy, specialists, or prayers had been able to find the key. Daniel was a man who solved problems for a living. As CEO of Mitchell Enterprises, a Fortune 500 company, he commanded boardrooms full of executives, negotiated million-dollar deals, and turned failing businesses into success stories. But he couldn't fix the one thing that mattered most: his daughter's silence. They walked toward the playground, Sophie's tiny fingers gripping his hand like a lifeline. Other children ran past them, shouting and playing games that Sophie watched with longing eyes but never joined. Daniel's chest tightened as he watched her sit on a bench, her legs swinging freely, her mouth sealed shut like a vault protecting treasures too precious to share. "Sophie, would you like to try the swings today?" he asked, his voice carrying the same gentle hope it held every afternoon they came here. Sophie looked at him with those impossibly blue eyes, Rebecca's eyes, and shook her head almost imperceptibly. That's when Daniel saw him. A boy, maybe Sophie's age, with dirty blonde hair that stuck up in all directions, and clothes that had seen better days. His sneakers had holes in them, and his t-shirt was 2 sizes too big, probably a hand-me-down. But his smile could have powered the entire city. The boy was building something in the sandbox, his tongue poking out in concentration as he shaped the sand with his bare hands. Other children played around him, but he seemed content in his own world, creating what looked like an elaborate castle, complete with towers and moats. Sophie stood up from the bench suddenly, her movement so quick it startled Daniel. She walked toward the sandbox with purpose, something he hadn't seen in her for 3 years. Daniel followed at a distance, his heart hammering against his ribs. The boy looked up as Sophie approached, and his face lit up like Christmas morning. "Hey there. Want to help me build this castle? I'm making it for a princess, but I think I need someone who knows what princess is really like." Sophie stopped just short of the sandbox, her eyes wide and focused on the boy's creation. She knelt down in the sand, her expensive dress be damned, and reached out to touch one of the towers. "Careful," the boy said quickly, but not harshly. "It's still a little wobbly." "My name's Marcus, by the way. Marcus Sanchez. What's yours?" Daniel held his breath. This was the moment that always broke his heart, when other children expected Sophie to speak, and she couldn't. The disappointment in their faces when she remained silent usually sent her running back to him. But something different happened today. Sophie opened her mouth, and for the first time in 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days, she whispered a single word that changed everything. "Sophie." Daniel's legs nearly gave out. Sophie had spoken. His daughter, his silent, precious Sophie, had just said her name to a complete stranger. The word hung in the air like a prayer answered, and Daniel felt tears streaming down his face before he could stop them. 3 years, 2 months, and 16 days of silence. Broken by a boy with sandy hair and a heart full of kindness. Marcus's face lit up like the 4th of July fireworks Sophie used to love before the world went quiet. "Sophie, that's such a pretty name," he exclaimed, clapping his sandy hands together with pure joy. "Just like Princess Sophie from my favorite book at the library. She's the one who could talk to animals and make flowers bloom just by smiling at them. Do you want to help me make the drawbridge? I can't figure out how to make it open and close properly." Daniel watched in amazement as Sophie nodded eagerly, actually eagerly, something he hadn't seen since before Rebecca's death. She scooted closer to Marcus in the sandbox, her pristine white dress now decorated with golden sand, and began carefully shaping the entrance to the castle with delicate fingers that hadn't played in years. "My mom used to read me stories about castles," Sophie whispered, her voice barely audible, but clear as crystal to Daniel's desperate ears. Each word was a miracle, a gift he thought he'd never receive again. She said, "Every castle needs a secret garden where the princess could go when she felt sad, somewhere beautiful and quiet, where she could think about happy things." Marcus's eyes widened with excitement, and he began digging enthusiastically in the sand. "A secret garden. That's the most brilliant idea ever. We could put it right here behind the main tower, with tiny flowers made of colored sand." He paused in his digging, looking at Sophie with curiosity that held no judgment. "Your mom sounds really smart and nice. Is she picking you up later, or are you going home with your dad?" Daniel's breath caught in his throat. This was always the hardest part, the moment when other children asked about Mommy, and Sophie's face would close off like shutters slamming shut. He'd watched it happen dozens of times, seen her retreat back into silence when the questions became too difficult to navigate. But today felt different. Today, Sophie's hands stilled in the sand. But she didn't run. She didn't shut down. Instead, she looked directly at Marcus with those impossibly blue eyes, Rebecca's eyes, and spoke with a steadiness that broke and mended Daniel's heart simultaneously. "Mommy's in heaven now," she said simply, her voice carrying a grace that seemed far beyond her 7 years. "She watches me from the stars every night. Daddy showed me which one is hers. It's the brightest one right above our house." Marcus stopped digging completely and looked at Sophie with an understanding far beyond his 7 years. The playground sounds seemed to fade around them as he processed her words with the serious consideration they deserved. "My daddy's in heaven too," he said gently, his voice dropping to match Sophie's reverent tone. "He went there when I was 5, but I remember everything about him. He had the biggest hands in the world, and he used to build the most amazing sand castles. Mama says he watches me from the biggest star in the sky, the one that looks like it's winking. She says he sends me good dreams sometimes, especially when I'm scared or lonely." Daniel felt his heart expand and break simultaneously. These two children, both touched by loss at such tender ages, had found each other in a sandbox and were sharing their deepest pain with the innocent honesty only children possessed. They spoke of death and heaven with the matter-of-fact acceptance that came from being forced to grow up too fast. "Maybe they're friends up there," Sophie suggested. And for the first time in over 3 years, a genuine smile tugged at the corners of her mouth. Not the polite practice smile she'd learned to wear for doctors and therapists, but a real spontaneous expression of hope. "I bet they are," Marcus agreed, his own smile matching hers. "And I bet they're really happy we're friends down here. Maybe they even helped us find each other today." As the afternoon sun began to set, casting the playground in golden hues that made everything look magical, Daniel realized something profound was happening. His daughter wasn't just speaking, she was healing. The locked-away part of her soul was opening like a flower reaching toward sunlight. And it was all because of a boy with holes in his shoes and a heart bigger than the sky. But as he watched them play, carefully constructing their castle and their friendship with equal care, Daniel couldn't shake the feeling that this moment was too perfect, too fragile. What would happen when this afternoon ended? What would happen tomorrow or next week? Could something so beautiful really last? "Daddy, can Marcus come to our house?" Sophie asked as they walked back to the Mercedes, her small hand still clutching Daniel's, but now with excited energy instead of the desperate need he'd grown accustomed to. Her voice carried a lightness he'd forgotten existed. Daniel glanced back at the sandbox where Marcus was carefully dismantling their castle, saving the sand for tomorrow's children with the kind of thoughtfulness that spoke to his character. The boy looked up and waved enthusiastically at Sophie, his gap-toothed grin infectious and pure, the kind of smile that could light up the darkest room. "We'll see, sweetheart," Daniel said, though his mind was already racing with questions and concerns. Who was this child? Where were his parents? Why was he alone at the park? And more importantly, what would happen to Sophie's newfound voice if this friendship couldn't continue? "Marcus," Daniel called out, his CEO instincts kicking in as he approached the boy. "Is someone coming to pick you up?" It's getting pretty late. The boy bounded over with boundless energy, sand still clinging to his worn clothes, and his hair sticking up in all directions. "Oh, I walk home." It's not far at all, just past the old brewery on Maple Street and around the corner from the laundromat with the flickering neon sign. Mama works at Danny's Diner until 8 o'clock, so I come here most days after school. Sometimes I go to the library first, but the park is my favorite place because you can build things and use your imagination. Daniel's blood ran cold. Maple Street was in one of the roughest neighborhoods in the city, a place where even police patrolled in pairs. The idea of a 7-year-old walking alone through those streets every afternoon was unthinkable, the kind of thing that kept parents awake at night with worry. "How long have you been walking by yourself?" Daniel asked, trying to keep his voice casual, while his mind calculated all the dangers a child could face in that area. Marcus shrugged with the nonchalance of someone too young to fully understand the risks he faced daily. "Since school started in September. Mama says I'm responsible enough now that I'm 7 3/4. Besides, Mrs. Garcia next door watches for me from her window. And Mr. Pete at the corner store always waves, and sometimes gives me a free piece of candy if I help him carry groceries for the old ladies." Sophie tugged insistently on Daniel's sleeve, her eyes bright with an idea. "Daddy, can we give Marcus a ride home, please?" "It's getting dark, and he shouldn't walk alone when it's dark." Daniel looked at his daughter's pleading eyes, the same eyes that had been empty and lifeless for so long, and knew he couldn't refuse her first real request in years. The protective instincts he felt for Sophie extended naturally to this remarkable boy who had given her back her voice. "Of course, Marcus. Would you like a ride home? We'd be happy to take you." The car ride was a revelation that changed everything Daniel thought he knew about childhood resilience. Marcus chatted nonstop about school, his favorite teacher, Mrs. Patterson, who let him help with story time, his mother's famous tamales that all the neighbors begged for, and his enormous dream of becoming an astronaut so he could visit his father among the stars. Sophie hung on every word, occasionally adding her own soft comments, each one a miracle to Daniel's ears. "Do you really want to go to space?" she asked. "That sounds scary." "Not scary," Marcus corrected gently. "Amazing. Think about it, Sophie. You could see the whole world from up there, and all the problems that seem so big down here would look tiny. Plus, I bet the view of heaven is much better from space." When they pulled up to a small, weathered apartment building on Maple Street, Daniel's heart sank. Paint peeled from the walls like old skin. The front steps looked ready to collapse under the slightest weight, and several windows were covered with cardboard instead of glass. This was poverty in its rawest, most unforgiving form. "Thanks for the ride, mister." Marcus paused, realizing he didn't know Daniel's last name, despite their afternoon together. "Mitchell," Daniel replied, watching the boy's face carefully. "Daniel Mitchell." Marcus's eyes widened with recognition and genuine excitement. "Like Mitchell Enterprises, the big building downtown with all the shiny windows that reflects the clouds. Mama cleans offices there sometimes on weekends when they need extra help." Daniel nodded, surprised the boy not only knew his company, but spoke about it with such enthusiasm. "Mama always says the people who work there must be really important because everything is so clean and fancy." Marcus beamed with innocent pride. "That's so cool. Sophie, your dad must be like a superhero in a suit." As Marcus disappeared into the building, waving enthusiastically until the last possible second, Daniel realized something deeply troubling. Sophie had found her voice again. But at what cost? Marcus lived in a world Daniel barely understood, a world of struggle and uncertainty that was as foreign to him as another planet. What happened when two worlds this different collided? And more importantly, what happened to Sophie if those worlds couldn't find a way to coexist? The next morning, Daniel found Sophie sitting by her bedroom window in the reading nook Rebecca had created years ago, fully dressed in her favorite blue dress and staring intently at the digital clock on her nightstand. Sunlight streamed through the gauze curtains, illuminating her golden hair like a halo. "It's only 7:30, sweetheart." "We don't need to leave for the park until 3, he said gently, settling beside her on the window seat that had been Sophie's favorite spot before the world went silent. "Can we go earlier today?" Sophie asked, her voice clearer and stronger than it had been yesterday, each word more confident than the last. Marcus said he might go to the library before the park today. "He's going to read stories to the little kids, and I want to see what books he likes. Maybe I could help him?" Daniel's heart swelled with joy and worry in equal measure. Sophie was speaking in full sentences, showing enthusiasm for activities beyond their quiet, carefully controlled routine. All positive signs that filled him with hope. But her entire emotional recovery seemed hinged on one little boy she'd known for less than 24 hours, and that dependence terrified him. "Sophie, honey, we need to talk about Marcus," Daniel began carefully, choosing his words like stepping stones across a dangerous river. "He's a wonderful boy, and I'm so happy you've become friends." "But he's my best friend," Sophie interrupted, with a firmness that surprised Daniel completely. "He understands about missing people and having holes in your heart that hurt sometimes. And he makes me want to talk again, Daddy. When I'm with him, the words don't feel stuck anymore." The simplicity and honesty of her statement hit Daniel like a physical blow. Marcus made her want to talk again. 3 years of the best therapist money could buy. Countless sessions with child psychologists, specialists flown in from around the world. None of it had accomplished what one afternoon with a boy from Maple Street had achieved. That afternoon they found Marcus at the public library, exactly where he'd said he would be, and the sight that greeted them took Daniel's breath away. Marcus sat in the children's section, surrounded by a diverse group of younger kids who watched him with rapt attention as he brought a story to life with animated voices and expressive gestures. And then the dragon realized that he wasn't scary at all. He was just lonely and misunderstood, Marcus was saying, his voice animated and engaging, his whole body moving as he acted out the story. Nobody had ever asked him why he breathed fire. They just ran away screaming. So when the princess finally sat down and asked him about his feelings, he started crying tears of joy instead of breathing fire. Sophie walked over without hesitation and sat cross-legged on the colorful carpet with the other children, completely absorbed in Marcus's storytelling. Daniel watched from behind the nearby stacks, amazed and emotional. His daughter, who had barely interacted with other children since the accident, was now part of a group, laughing and clapping along with the story, like she'd never been silent at all. When story time ended and the children scattered to find their own books, Marcus spotted Sophie and his face lit up like Christmas morning. "Sophie, you came. Did you hear the dragon story? It's one of my favorites because it teaches us that sometimes people who seem scary are just sad inside. I love stories where everyone ends up happy and understood." "Me too," Sophie replied with growing confidence. "Marcus, do you read stories here every day? You're really good at making the characters feel real." "Mrs. Patterson lets me help with story time on Wednesdays and Fridays," Marcus explained, with obvious pride. "She says I have a special gift for bringing characters to life and helping kids connect with books. I want to write my own book someday, stories that help sad kids feel better and less alone." Daniel felt something fundamental shift in his chest. This wasn't just a lucky encounter or a temporary bright spot. Marcus was genuinely special. His natural empathy, his intuitive way with children, his resilience despite obvious hardship. These were qualities that couldn't be bought, taught, or manufactured. As they left the library together, Sophie slipped her free hand into Marcus's with complete trust, creating a three-person chain that felt more natural than anything Daniel had experienced since Rebecca's death. For the first time in over 3 years, he felt like they might actually be a family again. But then Marcus mentioned something that shattered Daniel's growing sense of peace and changed everything. "Oh, by the way, Mama wanted me to thank you for the ride yesterday, Mr. Mitchell. She was worried when I was 15 minutes late getting home. But when I told her all about Sophie and our castle and how we're both missing people in heaven," she cried, happy tears. Marcus paused, his expression growing suddenly serious beyond his years. "She said it was the first time in months I talked about making a new friend instead of just missing Daddy. Mama's been really worried about me lately, especially since the eviction notice came. She tries to hide it, but I know she's scared." Daniel's blood turned to ice. Eviction notice. This perfect healing friendship was about to be destroyed by something as brutal and final as an eviction. Daniel couldn't concentrate on anything for the rest of the evening, while Sophie played quietly in her room, talking to her stuffed animals for the first time in years, creating elaborate stories that drifted through the house like music. His mind raced with Marcus's casual mention of an eviction notice. He tried to convince himself it wasn't his responsibility. He'd built Mitchell Enterprises from nothing by making hard decisions, by understanding that business was business and emotions were luxuries successful people couldn't afford. Getting personally involved in the financial troubles of every person who touched his life was a recipe for disaster. But every time he closed his eyes, he saw Marcus's gap-toothed smile and heard Sophie's laughter echoing through the house for the first time since Rebecca died. How could he weigh business principles against his daughter's miraculous recovery? At midnight, Daniel found himself in his mahogany-paneled study, laptop open, researching everything he could about 847 Maple Street, apartment 3B. What he discovered in the public records made his stomach churn with a mixture of sadness and anger at the unfairness of life. Isabella Sanchez, age 28, worked 3 part-time jobs, cleaning offices for minimum wage in the early morning hours, washing dishes at Danny's diner during the dinner rush, and occasionally babysitting for neighbors when her schedule allowed. Her husband, Carlos, had died in a construction accident 18 months ago, leaving behind massive medical bills from his 3-week fight for life and no life insurance to cushion the blow. The eviction notice was for 3 months back rent, a total of $1,800. Daniel stared at the number on his screen in disbelief. $1,800. He spent more than that on a single dinner at Le Bernardin. It was less than he paid for his monthly car detailing service. For the Sanchez family, it was the difference between having a home and living on the streets. Daniel picked up his phone 3 times to call his assistant Patricia, to have her cut a check and solve the problem quietly and efficiently, but each time he hesitated. What message would that send? What would happen next month when they couldn't make rent again? Was he solving a problem or creating a dependency that would ultimately make things worse? The next afternoon at the park, Marcus seemed different, quieter, less animated, his usual boundless energy dampened by worry too heavy for young shoulders. When Sophie asked him to help build another castle, he agreed, but his heart wasn't in it. His movements were mechanical, distracted. "Marcus, is everything okay?" Sophie asked with the intuitive concern that seemed to be her superpower. "You seem sad today. Did something happen?" Marcus's hand stilled in the sand, and for a moment Daniel saw the weight of adult concern settling on a child's face. "Mama cried again last night after she thought I was asleep." The man from the apartment office came by, and he wasn't very nice to her. He said mean things about people who don't pay their bills, and he gave her a new paper that said, "We have to leave in 2 weeks if we can't pay." Marcus looked up at Sophie with eyes that had seen too much. "I don't want to move far away, Sophie. I just found my best friend, and I don't want to lose you, too." Sophie's face crumpled with an expression Daniel hadn't seen since the day they told her Mommy wasn't coming home. "You can't move away. You're the only one who understands about mommies and daddies in heaven. You're the only one who makes me want to talk." Daniel watched his daughter's face cycle through emotions he hadn't seen in 3 years. Anger, fear, desperation, and a fierce protectiveness that reminded him so much of Rebecca. It took his breath away. She was feeling again deeply and completely, and it was both beautiful and terrifying. "Maybe your daddy can help," Marcus said suddenly, looking at Daniel with hopeful eyes that carried the weight of a family's future. "He's important, right? Important people can fix things that regular people can't fix." The weight of both children's expectant gazes settled on Daniel's shoulders like lead. He was important. He could fix this. But should he? And if he did, what would be the consequences for everyone involved? "I'll see what I can do," Daniel heard himself saying, though his mind was screaming warnings about boundaries and complications, and the dangerous territory of mixing business with personal feelings. That night, as Daniel tucked Sophie into bed in the room that still smelled faintly of Rebecca's lavender perfume, she looked up at him with those impossibly blue eyes and said the words that would haunt him for sleepless days to come. "Daddy, if Marcus moves away, I think I might stop talking again." He's the only person who makes the words want to come out of the quiet place where they've been hiding. Without him, I don't know if I'll remember how to use my voice. Daniel realized with crystal clarity that he wasn't just being asked to help a struggling family. He was being asked to save his daughter's voice, her healing, her future. But was he strong enough to bridge 2 worlds that seemed destined to remain apart? And what would be the cost of trying? Daniel stood outside 847 Maple Street at 7:30 the next morning, holding an envelope containing a certified check for $5,000, enough to cover back rent and several months ahead. He'd barely slept, wrestling with Rebecca's voice in his head, her gentle wisdom echoing through his memory. "You can't solve everything with money, Danny," she used to say when he tried to write checks for problems that required more than financial solutions. "Sometimes the heart needs more than the wallet can provide. Sometimes people need to feel like they've earned their dignity." But what was the alternative? Let Marcus and his mother get evicted. Watch Sophie retreat back into silence. Sometimes money was the only tool he had, the only language he spoke fluently enough to help. The apartment building looked even more run down in the harsh morning light. Graffiti covered most of the first-floor walls. The sidewalk was cracked and uneven, and the smell of garbage and despair seemed to hang in the air like fog. Daniel climbed the creaking stairs to 3B, each step echoing his doubts, and knocked gently. The woman who answered the door was not what he'd expected. Isabella Sanchez was beautiful in the way that hardship couldn't touch. High cheekbones that spoke of indigenous heritage, intelligent dark eyes that missed nothing, and an aura of dignity that poverty couldn't diminish. She wore scrubs that had seen better days, but were spotlessly clean, and she held a cup of coffee that smelled like it was mostly chicory and hope. "Mr. Mitchell," she said, recognizing him immediately from Marcus's excited descriptions. "Marcus told me all about you and Sophie. He hasn't stopped talking about his new friend since yesterday. Please come in." The apartment was tiny but immaculate. Every surface cleaned until it shone. Everything was organized with military precision, and despite the obvious poverty, there was love in every corner. Marcus sat at a small table doing homework, his tongue poking out in concentration, and he looked up with surprise and delight when he saw Daniel. "Mr. Mitchell, Sophie's daddy, are you here to see my room? I have a telescope that Daddy gave me before he went to heaven, and sometimes I look at the stars and tell him about my day." "Marcus, finish your math homework," Isabella said gently, her voice carrying the authority of a mother who was also her child's anchor. She turned to Daniel with curious eyes. "I'm sorry our place is so small. Can I offer you some coffee? It's not fancy, but it's strong." Daniel looked around the humble space at the carefully mended furniture, the hand-drawn pictures covering the refrigerator, the nursing textbooks stacked on every available surface. This wasn't just poverty. This was someone fighting tooth and nail to build a better life against impossible odds. "Mrs. Sanchez," Daniel began, pulling out the envelope with hands that weren't quite steady. "I want to help with your rent situation. Marcus and Sophie have become very close, and I understand you're facing some difficulties. Consider this a gift." "No." Isabella's voice was firm but not unkind, and her refusal hit Daniel like a physical blow. "I appreciate the gesture more than you know, Mr. Mitchell, but I don't take charity, not even from someone with the kindest intentions." Daniel blinked, stunned into silence. In his world, everyone took money if you offered enough. Everyone had a price, a number that would solve their problems and make them grateful. This was foreign territory. "Mrs. Sanchez, please." "I understand your pride, but Marcus and Sophie—" "And that's beautiful," Isabella interrupted with gentle steel. "My son hasn't smiled like this since his father died. And from what Marcus tells me, Sophie is finding her voice again. But money doesn't buy friendship, Mr. Mitchell. It complicates. It creates imbalances that children shouldn't have to navigate." "Then what can I do?" Daniel asked, genuinely confused and feeling helpless in a way that was completely unfamiliar. "I can't just watch you get evicted when I have the power to prevent it." Isabella studied him for a long moment, her intelligent eyes seeming to see straight through to his soul. When she spoke, her words would change everything. "You want to help? Give me a job. A real job with benefits and a future. I'm 2 semesters away from finishing my nursing degree, but I can't afford to continue. Help me build something lasting, not just pay for a temporary fix that solves nothing." Marcus looked up from his homework, his young face bright with understanding that amazed Daniel. "Mama's really smart, Mr. Mitchell. She's going to be the best nurse ever and help sick people feel better. Just like Sophie helped me feel better about missing Daddy, and I helped her find her voice again. It's like a circle of helping." Daniel stared at this remarkable woman and her extraordinary son, realizing he'd completely misunderstood everything about their situation. This wasn't about charity. It was about opportunity, dignity, and the chance to build something meaningful. But first, he needed to know something that Marcus had just revealed with casual wisdom. Exactly how much did this 7-year-old boy understand about loss, healing, and the miraculous power of human connection to transform lives? 3 days later, Daniel sat across from Isabella Sanchez in his executive conference room on the 42nd floor of Mitchell Enterprises. The contrast was stark. Isabella, in her best dress, which was still clearly second-hand, surrounded by Italian leather chairs and floor-to-ceiling windows that offered a view of the entire city. "I've spoken with our Human Resources Department," Daniel began, sliding a folder across the mahogany table. "We have an opening in our corporate wellness program. The position involves coordinating health services for our employees, working with our medical staff, and eventually managing wellness initiatives. It's perfect for someone with your background and future nursing degree." Isabella opened the folder, her eyes widening as she read the salary figure. "Mr. Mitchell, this is more than I make in 6 months at my 3 jobs combined." "There's more," Daniel continued, feeling a strange mix of nervousness and excitement. "The position comes with full healthcare benefits, tuition reimbursement for you to finish your nursing degree, and a daycare facility in the building where Marcus could stay after school until you're finished work." For the first time since he'd met her, Isabella Sanchez looked genuinely stunned. She stared at the papers for a long moment, then looked up at Daniel with eyes that glistened with unshed tears. "Why?" she asked simply. "This is incredibly generous, but why are you doing this?" "This goes far beyond helping with friendship between our children." Daniel had asked himself the same question 100 times over the past 3 days. The answer had crystallized slowly, painfully, like a truth he'd been avoiding since Rebecca's death. "Because Sophie hasn't just found her voice again," he said quietly. "She's found her light. And Marcus has something special, something that can't be taught or bought. He has the ability to heal people just by being himself. I've seen what he's done for Sophie, what he does with those children at the library. That's not just friendship, that's a gift." Isabella's hand trembled slightly as she turned the page. "The position would start immediately?" "Tomorrow, if you can manage it. We'll provide temporary housing assistance while you transition." "No." Isabella's voice was firm again. "No housing assistance. I'll make do with our apartment until I can afford something better." "But the job." She looked up at him with a smile that transformed her entire face. "The job I'll take with gratitude and the promise that you won't regret this decision." As they shook hands, Daniel felt something shift in his chest, a lightness he hadn't experienced since before Rebecca died. But as he watched Isabella gather the papers with shaking hands, he couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just set something in motion that would change all their lives in ways he couldn't imagine. That afternoon, when Marcus and Sophie met at the park, the news exploded from Marcus like fireworks. Sophie, guess what? Mama got a real job at your daddy's building. A job with insurance and everything. We don't have to move away." He spun around in the sandbox, arms outstretched, sand flying everywhere. Sophie's face lit up with pure joy. "Really? Really, truly? You get to stay?" "Forever and ever," Marcus declared. "And the best part is there's a place for kids in the building, so I can be close to Mama while she works. And maybe sometimes we can see each other during the day." Daniel watched their celebration with a warmth in his chest that felt foreign and wonderful. But as other parents at the playground began to notice their interaction, a clearly wealthy man watching his daughter play with a boy from the wrong side of town, he started to understand that their problems were just beginning. The whispers started immediately. "Isn't that Daniel Mitchell? What is he doing here? Did you see that boy's clothes look like they came from Goodwill? How odd to see them together." For the first time, Daniel realized that bridging two worlds wasn't just about money or jobs. It was about confronting a society that preferred its classes separate and its charity invisible. But as he watched Sophie and Marcus build their latest sand creation, a house with windows facing the sky so they could wave to their parents in heaven, Daniel knew there was no turning back. He'd committed to this path, and wherever it led, they would walk it together. 2 weeks into Isabella's new position at Mitchell Enterprises, the first cracks began to show. Daniel discovered this when his assistant Patricia knocked on his office door with an expression that meant trouble. "Mr. Mitchell, we need to discuss the situation with Mrs. Sanchez," Patricia said, closing the door behind her with unusual care. "What situation?" "Her work has been exemplary. The employees love the wellness program she's implementing." Patricia shifted uncomfortably. "It's not her performance, sir. It's the perception. Several board members have expressed concerns about your personal involvement in her hiring. There are rumors circulating about favoritism, about you bending company policies for personal reasons." Daniel felt his jaw tighten. Isabella Sanchez was hired based on her qualifications and our genuine need for someone with her skills. The fact that our children are friends is irrelevant. "Is it?" Patricia asked gently. "Sir, I've worked for you for 8 years. I've never seen you personally interview a candidate for a mid-level position, let alone someone without a completed degree." People are talking. Before Daniel could respond, his phone rang. Sophie's school. "Mr. Mitchell, this is Principal Stevens. Could you come in this afternoon? There's been an incident with Sophie." An hour later, Daniel sat in the principal's office while Sophie fidgeted in the chair beside him, her face streaked with tears. Across from them sat another parent, Mrs. Wellington, whose daughter Ashley was in Sophie's class. "Sophie hit Ashley during recess," Principal Stevens explained, "but when we asked her why, she said Ashley called her friend Marcus trailer trash and said she was stupid for playing with poor kids." Mrs. Wellington sniffed disdainfully. "Ashley was simply observing that Sophie seems to have formed an inappropriate attachment to a child from a very different background. Children need to learn about appropriate social boundaries." Daniel felt rage bubble up in his chest. But before he could speak, Sophie's small voice cut through the tension. "Marcus isn't trash. He's the kindest, smartest boy I know. He reads to little kids and makes them feel better when they're sad. Ashley doesn't know anything about him, and she doesn't know anything about being sad either." The room fell silent. Sophie had just spoken more words in defense of her friend than she'd spoken to anyone at school in 3 years. "Sophie, hitting is never appropriate," Principal Stevens said gently, "but I understand you were defending your friend." "That shows loyalty." Mrs. Wellington's face reddened. "This is exactly what I mean. This association is clearly affecting Sophie's behavior. Perhaps, Mr. Mitchell should reconsider allowing his daughter to spend time with children from such different circumstances." Daniel stood slowly, his voice deadly calm. "Mrs. Wellington, my daughter has found her voice for the first time in 3 years because of her friendship with Marcus Sanchez. If you have a problem with that, I suggest you examine your own prejudices rather than questioning my parenting decisions." As they left the school, Sophie slipped her hand into Daniel's. "Daddy, I'm sorry I hit Ashley. But I'm not sorry I stood up for Marcus. Mama used to say that standing up for people we love is always right, even when it's hard." Daniel squeezed her hand, feeling proud and terrified at the same time. Sophie was learning to fight for what mattered to her, but in doing so, she was also learning that their new family configuration would face resistance from a world that preferred its boundaries clearly drawn. That evening, as Daniel tucked Sophie into bed, she asked the question he'd been dreading. "Daddy, why do some people think Marcus isn't as good as me?" He's smarter than most kids in my class, and he's definitely nicer." Daniel sat on the edge of her bed, searching for words that could explain adult prejudices to a child's innocent heart. "Some people judge others by things that don't matter, sweetheart. Things like how much money their families have or where they live. But you know what really matters, don't you? How kind they are inside," Sophie said softly, "and whether they make you feel like talking when you thought you'd forgotten how." "Exactly. And Sophie, I'm proud of you for defending Marcus, even though hitting isn't the answer. Next time, use your words. You have powerful words now." As Daniel turned off the light, Sophie's voice drifted through the darkness. "Daddy, are people going to try to make Marcus and his mama go away because they think we don't belong together?" The question hit Daniel like a physical blow, because the truth was, he was beginning to fear the answer might be yes. The crisis came on a Tuesday morning in November, swift and brutal as a winter storm. Daniel was reviewing quarterly reports when Patricia burst into his office without knocking, her face pale and urgent. "Sir, you need to see this immediately." She thrust a local newspaper across his desk, her hand shaking slightly. The headline made Daniel's blood freeze. "Mitchell Enterprises CEO's personal charity case, favoritism or romance." Below, it was a photo of Daniel, Isabella, Marcus, and Sophie leaving the library together the previous weekend, looking for all the world like a family. The article was a masterpiece of innuendo and calculated speculation. It questioned Isabella's qualifications, suggested inappropriate relationships, and painted Daniel as a CEO who bent company policies for personal gain. Worse, it delved into Sophie's history, describing her as the traumatized daughter of the late Rebecca Mitchell, now potentially being used as a pawn in her father's midlife crisis. "How did they get this information?" Daniel demanded, his voice dangerously quiet. The reporter spoke to several employees, former school parents, even some of the park regulars. "Someone's been feeding them details for weeks." Patricia paused. "Sir, the board is meeting an emergency session this afternoon. They're concerned about the company's reputation." By noon, Daniel's phone was ringing constantly. By 2 o'clock, the story had been picked up by financial news outlets. By 4 o'clock, Mitchell Enterprises stock had dropped 3%. At 5 o'clock, Daniel found himself sitting across from his own board of directors like a defendant at trial. "Daniel, we've been friends for 15 years, said Jonathan Blackstone, the board chairman, and Daniel's old college roommate. "But this situation has become untenable. The appearance of impropriety is damaging our corporate reputation." "There is no impropriety," Daniel said firmly. "Isabella Sanchez was hired based on her qualifications and our genuine need. A woman with an incomplete degree and no corporate experience, hired at a salary 30% above industry standard, whose son happens to be your daughter's best friend." Board member Catherine Ross shook her head. "Daniel, even if everything is above board, the optics are terrible." Daniel looked around the room at faces he'd known for years, people he'd trusted with his company's future. "Are you asking me to fire her?" The silence stretched like a taut wire. "We're asking you to make a decision about what matters more," Jonathan said quietly. "Your personal relationships or the company your wife helped you build." The mention of Rebecca hit Daniel like a slap. Rebecca, who had believed in using success to lift others up. Rebecca, who would have loved Marcus's spirit and Isabella's dignity. Rebecca, who had made Daniel promise to never let Sophie's heart close off from the world. "I need time to think," Daniel said, standing abruptly. "You have until Friday," Catherine said. "Either Mrs. Sanchez resigns, or will be forced to call for a vote of no confidence in your leadership." That evening, Daniel sat in his study with a glass of bourbon he couldn't taste, staring at a photo of Rebecca holding baby Sophie. What would Rebecca do? What would she say about a world that punished kindness and demanded he choose between his daughter's healing and his company's reputation. His phone buzzed. A text from Isabella. "Mr. Mitchell, I've seen the news. I'll submit my resignation tomorrow. Thank you for the opportunity. Marcus and I will be fine." Before Daniel could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway in her pajamas, her face streaked with tears. "Daddy," Marcus called. He said his mama has to quit her job because people are saying mean things about us being friends. He said maybe we shouldn't see each other anymore because we're causing too much trouble. Daniel's heart shattered as he looked at his daughter's devastated face. She'd found her voice, her joy, her best friend, and now adult prejudices threatened to take it all away. "Is that true, Daddy? Do we have to stop being Marcus's family because people don't like us together?" Daniel realized that this moment would define not just his future, but Sophie's understanding of whether love and loyalty mattered more than public opinion and financial success. His answer would change everything. Daniel didn't sleep that night. By dawn, he'd made a decision that would either save his family or destroy everything he'd built. He called Patricia at 6 a.m. "Cancel all my meetings today and call an emergency press conference for 2 this afternoon." "Sir, the board specifically advised against." "I'm not asking for advice. I'm telling you what we're going to do." At 7 a.m., Daniel knocked on Isabella's apartment door. She answered still in her pajamas, her eyes red from crying. "Mr. Mitchell, I meant what I said. I'll resign today. I won't let Marcus and Sophie suffer because adults can't handle their friendship." "May I come in? We need to talk." In the small living room, Marcus sat at the kitchen table, pushing cereal around his bowl, his usual brightness dimmed. When he saw Daniel, he managed a brave smile. "Hi, Mr. Mitchell. I told Sophie she shouldn't be sad about Mama's job. We'll be okay. We're always okay." The child's resilience in the face of adult cruelty broke something in Daniel's chest. "Marcus, what if I told you that your mama doesn't have to quit? What if I told you that sometimes adults need to stand up to bullies just like kids do?" Marcus's eyes widened. "You mean like when Sophie hit Ashley for saying mean things about me?" "Exactly like that, except instead of hitting, I'm going to use my words. Very public words." Isabella stared at him. "Mr. Mitchell, you can't risk your company for us. It's not worth it." "You're wrong," Daniel said quietly. "You and Marcus have given me my daughter back. You've shown me what matters. And if my company can't survive me doing the right thing, then maybe it's not the company Rebecca and I dreamed of building." At 2 o'clock that afternoon, Daniel stood before a room full of reporters, cameras, and skeptical faces. Behind him, a large screen displayed the Mitchell Enterprises logo and mission statement: building communities, strengthening families, creating opportunities. "Good afternoon. I'm here to address recent speculation about my company's hiring practices and my personal relationships." Daniel's voice was steady, controlled. 3 months ago, my 7-year-old daughter Sophie spoke her first words in over 3 years. She had been silent since losing her mother in a car accident, despite the efforts of the finest specialists money could hire. A murmur went through the crowd. This wasn't what they'd expected. Sophie found her voice again because of her friendship with 7-year-old Marcus Sanchez, a remarkable child who understood loss, who showed kindness without expectation of reward, and who possessed a natural gift for healing broken hearts. Marcus's mother, Isabella Sanchez, is pursuing a nursing degree while working 3 jobs to support her son after losing her husband in a workplace accident. Daniel paused, looking directly into the cameras. "When I learned that the Sanchez family faced eviction, I was presented with a choice. I could write a check and feel good about my charity, or I could create an opportunity for a hard-working woman to build a better future for herself and her son. I chose opportunity. I chose to offer Isabella Sanchez a position with our company. a position for which she is uniquely qualified, having overcome adversity while maintaining her dignity, her work ethic, and her commitment to helping others. The room was completely silent. Now, Mitchell Enterprises has always stood for the principle that success means nothing if it doesn't lift others up. Today, I reaffirm that commitment. Isabella Sanchez was hired not because our children are friends, but because she embodies the values this company was built on. Any board member who can't support that decision is welcome to resign. Daniel stepped closer to the microphones, his voice gaining strength. I will not apologize for my daughter finding her voice. I will not apologize for recognizing talent regardless of someone's zip code. And I will not apologize for believing that in America, friendship between children should be celebrated, not scrutinized. As Daniel left the podium, reporters shouted questions, but he ignored them all. He had said what needed to be said. Now he had to live with the consequences. His phone was ringing before he reached his car. Jonathan Blackstone's name flashed on the screen. Daniel, what the hell do you think you just did? I told the truth, Jonathan. Something we seem to have forgotten how to do. The board is meeting tonight. This stunt of yours won't be necessary, Daniel interrupted, because I just remembered something important. I own 52% of this company, which means I don't serve at the board's pleasure. You serve at mine. The silence on the other end was deafening. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need to go pick up my daughter from school. She's probably wondering if her friendship is about to destroy everything she cares about. And I get to tell her that some things are worth fighting for. As Daniel hung up, he realized that for the first time since Rebecca's death, he felt like the man she'd married, the man who believed that doing right mattered more than being comfortable. The answer came sooner than Daniel expected. When he arrived at Sophie's school, he found her sitting in the principal's office with Marcus beside her, both children holding hands and looking remarkably composed for two 7-year-olds whose world had been turned upside down. Mr. Mitchell, Principal Stevens said, standing as Daniel entered. I called because the children insisted on being together today, and given the circumstances, we thought it best to keep them in the office where they'd be safe from media attention. Through the window, Daniel could see news vans in the school parking lot, reporters with cameras waiting for a glimpse of the children at the center of the story. Daddy! Sophie jumped up and ran to him. Did you really tell everyone on TV that Marcus and Isabella should stay? Did you really say friendship is more important than mean people's opinions? I did, sweetheart. I told them the truth about what you and Marcus mean to our family. Marcus approached more hesitantly. Mr. Mitchell, Mama saw your speech on the TV at work. She cried, but they were happy tears this time. She said you're the bravest person she's ever met. Marcus, your mother is the brave one, raising you alone, working so hard to build a better life. That takes real courage. Mr. Mitchell, Principal Stevens interrupted gently. There's something you should know. After your press conference aired, we received over 200 phone calls. Most of them were supportive. Parents sharing their own stories about their children finding friendship across social lines. People praising you for taking a stand. Daniel felt a small spark of hope. And the others? A few complaints, mostly from people we've had issues with before. But overall, the response has been overwhelmingly positive. It seems your message resonated with more people than you might have expected. That evening, as Daniel watched Sophie and Marcus reading together in Rebecca's garden, while Isabella helped prepare dinner in his kitchen, his phone rang. The caller ID showed Jonathan Blackstone's number. Daniel, I owe you an apology. The board met tonight, and after seeing the public response to your speech, we've unanimously decided to support your position. More than that, we want to expand the wellness program Isabella is developing. Make it a flagship initiative. Daniel stepped outside where he could speak privately. What changed your mind, Jonathan? My wife. She reminded me that our daughter struggled with anxiety for 2 years after our divorce, and the only thing that helped was a friendship with a girl from a completely different background. Sometimes we get so focused on protecting what we have that we forget why we built it in the first place. Through the kitchen window, Daniel could see Isabella and Sophie working side by side, teaching each other. Isabella showing Sophie how to season the vegetables. Sophie showing Isabella which herbs grew in different parts of the garden. Jonathan, there's something else. I want to establish a scholarship fund, the Rebecca Mitchell Memorial Scholarship for single parents pursuing healthcare degrees. I want to make sure other families like Isabella's have the opportunities they deserve. Consider it done. And Daniel, that little boy of hers. He's something special, isn't he? Daniel watched Marcus carefully watering the plants Sophie had shown him, explaining to each flower why it was important to drink water to grow strong. He is. They both are. The final test came on a cold December morning, 6 months after Sophie first spoke Marcus's name in that sandbox. Daniel was reviewing the Rebecca Mitchell Memorial Scholarship applications when Patricia knocked on his door with an expression he'd learned to recognize. "Mr. Mitchell, there's someone here to see you. She says it's about the Sanchez family, and she won't speak to anyone else. Her name is Dr. Elena Martinez, and she seems upset." The woman who entered Daniel's office was in her 50s, with graying hair pulled back severely, and the bearing of someone accustomed to difficult conversations. "Mr. Mitchell, I'm Dr. Martinez from Children's Hospital. I was Sophie's trauma counselor for the first year after the accident." She paused, studying his face. "I need to talk to you about Marcus Sanchez." Daniel's blood turned cold. "Is Marcus sick? Has something happened?" "No, nothing like that. But there's something you need to know. Something I should have told you months ago when I first saw the news coverage." Dr. Martinez sat down heavily. "Mr. Mitchell, Marcus Sanchez was also my patient." "What do you mean?" 18 months ago, when his father died in that construction accident, Marcus was in the car that brought Carlos to the hospital. He saw everything. The accident, the ambulance, his father's final moments. He developed selective mutism just like Sophie. For 8 months, Marcus didn't speak to anyone except his mother, and even then only in whispers. Daniel felt the room spinning. "That's impossible. Marcus talks constantly. He's the most verbal child I've ever met." "Now he is. But when he first came to me, he was as silent as Sophie ever was." His healing began about 4 months ago, right around the time he met Sophie. Dr. Martinez leaned forward. "Mr. Mitchell, what happened between Sophie and Marcus in that sandbox wasn't just friendship. It was 2 traumatized children recognizing each other's pain and healing each other through connection." The revelation shattered everything Daniel thought he understood. Marcus hadn't helped Sophie find her voice. They had found their voices together. "Why didn't Isabella tell me?" Daniel asked. "Because Marcus made her promise not to?" He was afraid that if people knew he'd been broken too, they wouldn't trust him to help Sophie. He was protecting her recovery by hiding his own journey. "There's more, Doctor." Martinez continued. "The day of Carlos's accident, he was working on a construction project for Mitchell Enterprises. The building site where he died was the foundation for your new corporate headquarters." Daniel's world tilted on its axis. Carlos Sanchez had died building Daniel's dreams. "Dr. Martinez, why are you telling me this now?" "Because Marcus is struggling again." The media attention, the scrutiny of his friendship with Sophie, it's bringing back his trauma. "Isabella called me yesterday because he's starting to withdraw, starting to blame himself for the problems your family is facing." 20 minutes later, Daniel found himself back at 847 Maple Street. Isabella answered the door, her face streaked with tears. "Mr. Mitchell, I was going to call you." Marcus has been so quiet since yesterday. He won't even talk to Sophie on the phone." They found Marcus in his room, sitting by the window with the telescope his father had given him. When he saw Daniel, he managed a weak smile. "Hi, Mr. Mitchell. I'm sorry I've been weird lately. I don't want to cause any more trouble for Sophie." Daniel sat on Marcus's small bed. "Marcus, doctor. Martinez came to see me today. She told me about your dad, about the accident, about how you couldn't talk for a long time, too." Marcus's face crumpled. "She promised she wouldn't tell. I made her promise." "Why didn't you want me to know?" "Because," Marcus's voice broke, "because if people knew I was broken too, they might think I was making Sophie worse instead of better. And because my daddy died building something for your company, and I was afraid you'd feel too sad about that to let us be friends anymore." "Marcus, look at me. Your father didn't just die building something for my company. He died building something that would create jobs for hundreds of families. He was a hero, just like you apostrophe. I'm not a hero. I'm just a kid who got scared and stopped talking. You're a hero because you found your voice again, and you used it to help Sophie find hers. You're a hero because you saw someone else who was hurting, and you chose to be brave for her, when you were still learning to be brave for yourself." As Daniel spoke, he saw the light slowly returning to Marcus's eyes. But the real magic happened when Sophie appeared in the doorway. "Marcus Sanchez," she said with the fierce authority of a 7-year-old on a mission, "you stop feeling sorry for yourself right now. We're both broken, and we fixed each other, and that's the most beautiful thing in the whole world." Marcus stared at her for a moment, then burst into laughter. "Sophie Mitchell, you're the bossiest best friend anyone ever had. Good. Now come here and help me tell our dads that we want to do something special for all the kids whose mommies and daddies are in heaven." 6 months later, Daniel stood in the brand new children's wing of the Mitchell Family Healing Center, watching Marcus and Sophie lead a support group for children who had lost parents. The center, built with funds from the Rebecca Mitchell Memorial Foundation and staffed by Isabella Sanchez Mitchell, who had legally become part of their family through adoption, served families from every corner of the city. "The thing about missing someone," Marcus was telling a room full of children, "is that it never stops hurting completely. But it can start hurting less when you find other people who understand." Sophie nodded seriously. "And when you help other kids who are sad like you were, it makes the sad turn into something useful. Like how flowers grow from dirt. The dirt isn't pretty, but it makes beautiful things possible." As Daniel watched his daughter, their daughter, help another silent child find words, he understood that this had always been Rebecca's plan. Somehow, from whatever place she watched over them, she had orchestrated this entire beautiful collision of broken hearts, learning to beat in harmony again. 2 children who had found their voices in a sandbox, had become healers for a world full of people learning to speak after silence. And Daniel Mitchell, the CEO, who had once thought love could be measured in dollars and success could be quantified in profits, had learned that the most valuable things in life couldn't be bought. They could only be chosen, nurtured, and shared with hearts brave enough to remain open despite the risk of breaking. In the end, Sophie had been right from the very beginning. Sometimes the most beautiful thing in the whole world was simply 2 broken people choosing to fix each other, one word at a time.